This is Chipacon, and I welcome you to tonight's version of the Otherworldly, the Changing Times, Changing Worlds show, where we talk about many metaphysical, paranormal, occult practices. Tonight, our guest is Jason Mankey, who is, now I'm a little bit confused. Is the Horn God of the Witches coming out in March, or did it just come out?
Horn God of the Witches came out in June.
Oh,
the
okay.
Witch's Book of Spellcraft comes out in March. Everything's just all over top of each other.
I got that wrong. Okay, so yeah. So anyway, he is a Gardnerian high priest, author. He's got 7 books now. Not quite sure. I read into his articles on Patreon and really liked several of them, which is why I reached out to him. What is a channel master?
Oh, I was the channel manager at Pathos Pagan for 5 or 6 years. I gave that post up last year about this time, but I ran that for quite a while. It's definitely part of the resume.
Yeah, okay. I just I've never heard of it. I have no idea what it meant, but so I figured I would ask. And you've got 2 covens that you're running, and apparently a wife and cats. And,
yes, in that order, absolutely.
Well, gee, I hope so. Wives usually last longer. And I have to be among the books. He started out with, as I recall, the Witch's Athame, and
that was,
and the Book of Shadows and the Altar with Laura Tempest Zakroff, and Transformative Witchcraft Mysteries, and the Wheel of the Year, Solitaries, Circle Solitaries and Covens, and Little Book of Yule, which makes me a little cranky because I'd pitched something like that to Llewellyn about 20 years ago, and they didn't take me up on it. So, okay, fine, I'm doing it with you. And so the Witch's Book of Spellcraft. I have to ask, in what way do you think Witch's Spellcraft is different than anybody else's spellcraft?
There's really no particular way, but it's the title of the book, and Llewellyn comes up with the titles. I will say, there are various different ways of using magic, and in my own practice, there's ceremonial high magic when I think of ceremonial magicians and Thelemites, and I always think that my witchcraft magic is a little more salt of the earth, a little less formal, a little less ceremonial. So yeah, it's, for me, witchcraft magic is very much kind of like a modern folk magic in its way. Also, the term witchcraft more and more sometimes is just used to mean magic user. So anybody who does that's kind of salt of the earth magic, they're probably doing witchcraft according to a lot of people.
I am sure that that anybody who doesn't approve of magic would probably just throw us all together. But there's a difference between witches and other magic users. There's a difference between being a Wiccan and a witch. I've been told, okay, you're a witch, I can tell, but I'm a magic user. How do you define witch? And yes, I use magic. I do healing. I do a little bit of weather working when it seems not inappropriate. I wear long striped socks. So you tell me what your definition of witch is, and I'll tell you if I am one. How about we get yours?
To me, witch is a self-identification. There's not much that's really necessary to be a witch other than saying I identify as a witch, because I can't see people who hate witchcraft identifying that way. The word has just been used in so many different contexts. I mean, there are fairy tale witches. Wicca and witchcraft were synonyms for a very long time. As I said before, a lot of people look at any sort of folk magic or family magical tradition and just say it's witchcraft, regardless of somebody's religious or spiritual leaning. So to me, witchcraft is really just a self-identifier. If you say you're a witch, you probably are a witch. That's how I look at it. I know some people don't like that answer, but I think it's the safest one for me, I think.
It's always good to know when you're trying to communicate, you need to know how somebody else is using a word. And we run into that. Part of the inspiration for Changing Times, Changing Worlds was that at different events, people use different words differently and would end up fighting about it. And I said, we need to come together. we need to get common ground. And I am, what is it? I am, as other people who've seen the show a lot know, I'm a history nerd. So the history, the way you get into the history of witchcraft, the history of occult. You had a wonderful article on Patreon on the greatest American occultists.
Right. I love history stuff.
Oh yeah, but just to quickly run through for those who haven't read it, and I can say, go to Patreon, read this. He included John George Honman, who wrote The Long Lost Friend, Marie Laveau, the Witch Queen of New Orleans, the Fox sisters, Pascal Beverly Randolph, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that.
You got it.
Albert Pike, Harvey Spencer Lewis, Manly P. Hall. I'm still working my way through Secret Teachings of All Ages. Oh my God, what a work of scholarship that was. Edgar Cayce, which was one of the first occultists, if you count it as a cult. They didn't have Charles Fort in there. I was surprised. Jack Parsons, Carlos Castaneda, Starhawk. I'm not sure why Starhawk, is Starhawk a great occultist? I never met her, so.
When I was putting that together, it kind of evolved around like who has done the most to propagate magical thinking in the United States, or outside the box thinking. And for the most part, I don't think those people were witches, because witchcraft is such a very small segment of our community. But people who did bigger things. So Edgar Cayce, clairvoyance, Atlantis, healing things while in a trance. To me, that's pretty magical. So to me, that's a big deal. And he was a very influential figure for much of the early 20th century. The Fox sisters obviously started spiritualism. Starhawk, though, because of her activism, is one of the few witches to really break through to a bigger platform, especially during the 70s and the 80s. And I think that Starhawk also helped witches to get taken a little more seriously. She and Margot Adler, in particular. I mean, I don't know if Starhawk would think of herself as a great occultist, but she's certainly a great witch. And to me, witchcraft is an occult practice. So to me, it made sense to just kind of throw that in there.
What about Charles Fort? Why didn't you put him in there?
There's only so many spaces, and there's only so many words that you can write in a day. So, it's all subjective. Those were my picks. I don't know if it was particularly scientific. I just kind of think about the things and the names, particularly the names that I ran into when I was in elementary school, junior high, and high school, because I started reading about the occult at a very young age. And I remember names like Edgar Cayce and Kate and Maggie Fox. Pascal Beverly Randolph is a newer name to me, but then I kind of look and I see what his influence was on groups like, not the OTO to some extent, certainly Aleister Crowley. He had a big impact on sex magic, even if he's not well known in a lot of our circles today. Yeah. But a lot of it comes back to the things that I read when I was younger, and did those people come through? And then there's figures like Marie Laveau, who in many ways is more of a figure of folklore than a figure of historical fact. We know some things about Marie Laveau, that's absolutely true. But a lot of the things that people think they know about Marie Laveau evolved a long ways after her death, like 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Like the idea that she's a hairdresser, for example, comes from a fiction book not from anything contemporary to her time. So, but she looms large over everything. If you were to ask people, you know, what do you know about voodoo, they would probably say Marie Laveau. So to me, that she's a very important figure.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good list. I like it, but then again, I am a history nerd, especially history of the magic and the occult. Can you say a few words? This has nothing. I'm kind of. I should stick to things that you have talked about. I mean, you've written about, but what do you think about fictionalized accounts? From Bewitched to Charmed to Buffy, what effect do you think that's had on the world?
I think it's had a big effect. I think it's had a huge effect. I think any door that opens for someone is a legitimate door. You know, I'm a Generation Xer, so I grew up in the time of the Craft movie, right? And there were a lot of people who came into witchcraft because of that particular movie. You know, specifically, they wanted to do the kind of things that were in that film. I remember there was a lot of gnashing of teeth in magazines like The Green Egg at the time, you know, how they were unserious and wouldn't stick around. And, you know, of course, people who are influenced by movies and television, oftentimes they're not serious and don't stick around. But I think that there are a lot who do. And I think it's mostly a good thing. I think people find out very quickly that their magic wand does not work like the magic wands in Harry Potter, right? But anything that provokes the imagination, I think anything that gives witches a better name or magical practitioners in general a better name is good for us, especially when things like book burnings are still happening in the year 2022. So I think it's mostly a net positive.
I was gonna say, once you have, what we need is to get down the rabbit hole, and then you can go through any one of those doors once you're down there.
Yeah, and I would think that, you know, it's probably been this way for a long time, that fiction inspires people to do magical things. I mean, there's truth in fiction, maybe not literal truth, but people find inspiration and take things from it. And mostly I think what comes out of it is good.
So talk about your upcoming book, because this, you know, I like to let people do that, because, and also it doesn't seem to be quite the same as your previous ones.
I think when you start writing witchcraft books that you're contractually obligated to eventually write a spell book. So I thought it was my turn. I wanted a book that kind of answered questions that weren't answered when I started doing this in the early 90s. And, you know, like you read spell books and they'll be like, take this oil and take this herb and take this rock and do these things. But how are those things all working together? Like, what power is in an oil? What power is in a stone? What power is in an herb? People say different herbs can do different things. If you walk around with a piece of basil in your pocket, is it going to affect the world and everybody you run into? So I wanted to kind of look at magic from a different perspective and talk about sort of the energies that are involved with various magical disciplines, such as candle magic, stones and crystals, herbs, incenses and oils, the written word, and a few other things, and explore those territories, especially as witches see them and use that type of magic, and also to give spells on those various disciplines. So, you know, there's a chapter about a certain discipline, whether it's candle magic or stones, and then that's followed by a bunch of spells utilizing those various items. And the whole idea is that the book builds on what comes before it. So, you know, you do this type of magic first, and then this, and then eventually you kind of put it all together at the end. I just don't see a whole lot of magic books like that. Today, it just seems to be catalogs of spells. Here's 2,000 spells. But I mean, that's great, you know, if you're a seasoned cook, like, you know, or a seasoned witch, because it's kind of like a cookbook, but sometimes you have to learn how to cook. So this is sort of how to do witch style magic.
Yeah, I would, that is different enough that I will probably get it. I already have 5,000 spells and several of the other Llewellyn offerings, but it's like a cooking course rather than a bunch of recipes. So
That was
I'll
my hope.
probably
Yeah.
I'll probably get that one. You, have you what's your you said the magic, the power of the word. I immediately think Egyptian magic. They were very big on that.
Not
What back
when I talk about like the power of words, you know, I sometimes think that you could do a spell just by writing things on a piece of paper. You know, I think that there's this idea that you have to light candles and burn incense and everything has to look like a photo from Instagram. But the point of magic, especially kind of salt of the earth, dirty magic, is that it should be easy. So if you have a pen and you have a piece of paper, I think that you can write a spell. So the word spells are kind of in that vein, kind of starting easy. And that's really the first magical chapter in the book, is to look at kind of spells of that nature, you know, things that you can do really quickly and easily. I wrote this book with 3 of my friends, and they're a little younger than me. And my wife discovered witchcraft when she's one of the co-authors when she was in high school, and she had a very Catholic family, and she used to do rituals at 2 a.m. while her sister was asleep. And it was hard to do spells because her stepfather and her mother went through all of her things, you know, so we wanted to talk about sort of easier things that people could do that others would not find.
how to hide this book?
Yes, yes.
It's got to be different when you're young enough so that you really are under the control of others. And I think many of us did start that, thanks to Charmed and the,
yeah. And we're in this witch moment right now too, where there are people who are starting younger and younger, you know, because they have access to it. You know, back in like my day, if you wanted to learn witchcraft, the only place you could really stumble upon it if you were in a small town was at a bookstore or maybe the public library, right? I mean, you didn't see copies of Pagan and witch magazines on store shelves, especially in the early 90s. You know, it was difficult to get in, and now all you need is a phone, really, and you can surf the internet and find thousands of witch-related things. So the barrier to entry is a lot easier than it used to be. So I think it appeals more to young people because of that, because it's easier to find.
Yeah. But now I remember getting a questionnaire back in the late 80s. Where they asked how many rituals do you know, how many pagan festivals do you go to in a year? And I kind of, they were using that as a way of figuring out how dedicated you were to being a pagan. And I was like, that's like asking people how often they celebrate Christmas and Easter to find out how Christian they are. It's like, festivals are where you get together and they're wonderful, but it's not where you practice. I was going somewhere with that and I've forgotten where I was going.
I would say too that there's a barrier to entry with festivals because they cost money, right? You have to be able to go to the festival. Not only that, you have to be able to take work off to go to the festival. So, you know, it's a net loss. Maybe if you go for a week, right? You're losing a week of work and you're paying to be somewhere for a week. You know, I think it's a real privilege to be able to afford to go to festivals. You know, a lot of people can't.
Yeah, I'm going to throw a little, I agree with that. I have a friend here in New Hampshire who has created she and her husband created something called the Sacred Space. And they've got family cap, and they've got they keep it cheap. They bought it so that they could have festivals that were cheap, and so I think it has a $50 family cap, and so that the whole family's there, and she doesn't want anybody to have to mortgage the house to do festivals. And a sacred place in Canaan, New Hampshire. But yeah, money is a issue, and it's one of the things that spells shouldn't be expensive. Have you encountered the spell that says that there's a couple spells to get money, and one says start with a good-sized emerald, another one says take 7 gold rings, and
Yeah.
yeah. How much money are you looking for here?
I remember picking up Raymond Buckland's Practical Candle Burning Magic book when I was younger, and every spell calls for like 20 candles, which to me isn't very practical. And you know, I needed money, which meant I didn't have $20 to spend on 20 candles, right? I mean, it was much more difficult than it needed to be.
And nobody had told you the hack of using birthday candles. You get a box of 20 for 59 cents.
At the time, I couldn't afford those either. So, I mean, it was bad both ways around.
Yeah. But another one of your posts that I liked, and I'm a great fan of Patreon Pagan, the one on public festivals and how to do a festival ritual, and you know, keep people moving. Oh my God, I stood in line. I have been bored. I have not heard what they were saying. I have been involved, and they handed me the script 5 minutes before it, and it's very hard to memorize if the person's writing the ritual right up to just before it happens. Talk to us about that, because I thought you were brilliant.
I love ritual. I take it really seriously, I think, but public ritual is really hard to do, especially big public ritual. The first witch rituals were really written for, you know, 8 to 15 people, maybe. So a lot of the things you do with that small group don't really translate to a group of 80 or 300. And that's what you see at large festivals. And I'm always surprised by the mistakes that I see at festivals, even with people who are normally like great presenters and ritualists. The dreaded line where you have to stand in line for 30 minutes to do something, and then you have to go back to your seat and wait another hour while the rest of the group goes through the line. You know, that's not really a ritual, because you're not actively engaged in it other than that one little moment. Now, that one little moment may be great, but you've got to build like other things around that moment so that people are continually active. And you also can't trust people sometimes too. In those situations with the big lines, people are going to chatter at each other. They're going to whisper to each other. They're going to talk because they're going to get bored. And, you know, scolding them is one thing that you can do, but it's not realistic to expect people to sit quietly for 2 hours while nothing is happening for them. You know, so planning that middle part of a ritual is just such a difficult thing to do. And unlike someone like who goes to a Baptist seminary or whatever, we don't really have tools to teach people those things. You know, you don't go to witch school necessarily to learn how to do ritual, especially 20, 30 years ago. That's changing. There are some groups and things that are doing that. But for most people, I don't think it's something that they experience. So it's basically learning by trial and error. And some people don't learn even by trial and error. So coming up with that middle is really hard. And I always try to tell people, you know, give others something to do. A ritual is not a play. A ritual should not be a passive activity. It should be something that everyone is engaged in. That doesn't mean everyone has to talk the whole time, but everyone should be thinking about the meaning of the ritual and what's happening in the ritual. And if you're just standing in line, that's probably not happening. You know, there are also practical considerations that people need to do when it comes to ritual. They should practice if they're going to do a ritual for 100 people. You know, they should maybe do a walkthrough. They should think about staging. They should think about what they're doing and will it be heard by others? Will it be seen by others? I did not take drama in high school. I had to learn things from my wife who did take drama. But when you're doing a ritual for 100 people in a big space, you have to do big and slow movements so everyone can see exactly what you're doing. And then you have to slow down how you're talking and talk in this very loud way and project and be clear. And people miss that oh so very much. And it's really frustrating. And I think that when we do public ritual, we have a responsibility to get it right, especially in our local circles. because I think that people who are seekers go to these rituals and they read things in books about how great ritual is going to be and how exciting it will be. And then they get this sort of lackluster ritual and they kind of give up on ever being a part of the community, maybe give up their practice entirely. So if someone is going to take on the responsibility of public ritual, they need to do everything that they can do to get it right. The Witch's Wheel of the Year book is about the Sabbats, but it's also about doing ritual and things that I've learned over the years. And there's a big chapter on how to do group ritual, just because I see it done. I don't want to say wrong, and I don't like to critique people for it, because I think people are generally doing the best that they can, and it takes a lot of bravery and courage to do large public rituals. But I always think that we can do a little better, and that includes myself.
Absolutely. Perhaps, and maybe this isn't the right time to talk. I can talk you later on. I can talk you into coming back to Changing Times, Changing Worlds. I know you're in California, but we're going to be virtual again this year. So maybe you could teach a class on doing public rituals then. I was wondering, have you ever tried different styles of ritual? I know you work with Covens and you're a Wiccan high priest, but have you tried, say, a Greek rituals or Egyptian ritual? We aren't in the same situation. We don't have a public that all knows what to expect. Most of our rituals are part demo for a crowd that has come to see the merchants. But have you tried rituals of different varieties? Have you tried Druid rituals, Hellenic, Kemetic?
I have. I love ritual, and I love playing with ritual. I've done a lot of Greek style ritual over the years, you know, using resources that talk about Greek religion and kind of coming up with my own outline. When talking to other Hellenic practitioners, my outline is pretty similar to theirs. So I feel like if I didn't get it 100% right, it's not too far off from what other people are doing. I also like to take historical works and create rituals around some of those. So one of the rituals that I like to do at festivals is called the 1899 ritual, and only uses materials from 1899 or before to create a witch style ritual. So I use Aradia by Charles Leland, some romantic poetry that I really like, particularly a poet named Charles Algernon Swinburne, some things from the Masons. That's really fun. I've done the same thing with Margaret Murray's book, trying to construct a ritual based on the witch cult in Western Europe and the god of the witches. And I've also done the same with Dion Fortune's The Sea Priestess, doing a ritual in the style of Dion Fortune. So I love exploring those pieces of occult and witch history and building rituals around them. I've never done Egyptian style ritual though, except maybe once or twice at a festival where I was just a participant. The Greek stuff I've gotten to do in a couple of public places. That's fun, but also kind of, I don't want to say it's like difficult or anything, but I worry about expectations, because for a long time I did rituals in honor of Jim Morrison of The Doors as the 20th century incarnation of Dionysus. So people began to expect really sort of wild, crazy, and drunken rituals from me, and the Greek rituals are not like that.
Not doing Dionysian. Okay. Well, I'm not sure I want Meneids running around festivals anyway. They are not controlled. I like the, okay, we're going to do a sacrifice and then have a nice barbecue, but you can't do animal sacrifice in public in America. There are too many vegans and vegetarians around who would take that wrong.
The closest we've come is we've thrown mutton on the fire in the backyard while doing Greek style ritual as an offering. But obviously we got that from a butcher, not from anything else. And the Greek ritual that I would really like to do, like some of the Pan and Dionysian things, those probably are never going to be allowed in those public spaces. Also, I might get in trouble with my wife. Maybe I shouldn't do those.
Yeah, well, maybe in a private, but many, and I'll take it, as long as people know what's going to happen beforehand. I think a lot of problems come up in rituals when you try and blend groups. and they each have different expectations. Been to East Coast thing where there were kindreds from all up and down the East Coast, and we ran into trouble when the horn was being passed in one group. Always required that the horn be passed from male to female. Lovely, but they just had a big circle with everybody, and when a guy tried to pass it to him, he wouldn't take it because he was male. And if they had known beforehand, if they'd had communication, they could have bypassed that problem. But yeah, we need more rehearsal, I think.
One of the things when I do a public ritual is I like to tell people kind of what we're going to do. So if somebody's uncomfortable with it, they can leave. You know, like if you're doing a Margaret Murray style ritual, you might call the horn god the devil, you know, and some people react very viscerally to that. You know, they're very offended by that. And I tell them before we start, so I don't want people storming off, you know. You want to keep some of the surprise of ritual. I think that's important, but you've got to kind of lay out some things of an operational nature, like passing around the horn, or you know, you're going to get into trouble.
Yeah. Well, it does involve people, but they do need to know what to expect. Okay, so there's another one of your books I'm going to get. The more I know about you, the better I like you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to blush. Thank you.
Let's see. But well, you know, not making a pass at you. Your wife is fine. I want to before. I'm stopping again. Do you want to open the microphone so people can ask other questions if you've had something that you wanted to ask when you saw Jason was going to be on? It's like, hey, yeah. Does anybody else have something they wanted to say or ask Jason?
Well, I had my hand up for a while from early on because you touched on something that kind of hit close to home for me. And that is, like, you talked about the difference between witchcraft and Wicca.
Right.
And I have like personal experience, including even experience back in New Hampshire in Chipcon's territory, where I had a good friend back there who was a tech geek like me, and he was also a Wiccan. And I occasionally heard him criticized for being what they called high church Wiccan. And they made him sound like an Episcopalian witch. Yeah. And I have to remember, this is the same guy that got me my last good high-tech job and made it impossible to get the next one. But then now I've been married for 29 years this coming Sunday to a woman who's only figured out in the last few years that what she's been doing her entire life is witchcraft. And she's a very nuts and bolts, shade tree mechanic kind of witch. And, you know, so there's ritual and then there's ritual, I guess. I mean, she has a very orderly process in that sense. But, and we do, by the way, we do candle magic now. By the way, Shipicon, real quick side trip. Thank you for introducing me to Mother Hulda, who has now become a regular companion and who has improved my life. So
Okay,
there's a
back
lot
on track.
there's a lot that goes on here that's all about and of course we get into things like anything material is just something to focus the intent of the magician. So the candles are that and all of that. But your thoughts on the distinction between Wicca, which seems like a formal, well, I want to say ritualized practice, and just basic witchcraft?
That is a good question because it can be very contentious, the different, like witchcraft versus Wicca. And
no kidding.
More than ever. I mean, because the two were used as synonyms for a very long time, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 50s, up until the 90s, really. You know, Wicca means witch. That's where it's an old English word that means something like witch. To me, what Wicca is a type of witchcraft. It's a specific type of witchcraft how to define Wicca, I think, is going to vary from person to person. But to me, Wicca is defined not by theology, but by ritual practice. You know, I practice Wiccan witchcraft. I like casting a circle, calling quarters, invoking deities, doing something in the middle, having cakes and ale, dismissing everything. To me, when people are doing that, they're basically doing Wicca, because that's the ritual structure of Wicca. It is probably high churchy. It is probably the most like spiritual of the things that we call witchcraft necessarily. And it's strange though, because I read people who are very like, I'm not a Wiccan, and they cast a circle, call the quarters, invoke deity. They do all of the things that Wiccans do, but they're very adamant about not being Wiccan. So it's a really difficult conversation, you know, and I'm like, it's really strange that you hate Wicca so much, since the ritual format you are using comes from Wicca. Yeah.
And like I say, and one of the reasons it meant so much to me personally as a distinction was because my wife, the Nuts and Bolts Witch, I went to her recently and said, I need help. I was suffering a lot of spiritual and psychic backlash and fatigue from the presentation I gave last week, where I spoke for an hour and a half about preparing for death. And I felt like my brain had been run through a blender. And we also recognized that the key to that was that I am finding a voice where I've never had a voice before. I said, help me, what do we do here? Well, she pulled out this lapis donut about the size of the hubcap of a Volkswagen. God knows where she got it. And I spent the evening at bed with that resting on my throat. But this is like day-to-day doing the dishes witchcraft. And there it was. I went to the witch, I explained my problem, and I got results. So,
you know, like my wife and I would say that we're Wiccans, and then sometimes, you know, she'll hand me the stone and say, just hold on to this for a while, right? Because you need to calm down or whatever. You know, so to me, Wicca is, you know, my ritual practice, and I think it's part of being a witch, and for me, and it's a part of my witchcraft experience. But then there's also just sort of doing the magic too, right? And most people would look at that and say witchcraft.
All right. Well, that sort of confirms what I thought, and it kind of harmonizes my own personal experience too. So thank you for that.
I wanted to ask about the Horn Guard of the Witches. I was very happy to see you pointing out that Tan is not Cernunnos, and because, you know, I keep hearing, or I heard a lot, perhaps it was mostly in the 80s and 90s, all gods are one gods, all goddesses are one goddess. And I say, that's like saying all mothers are one mother. You go to pick up your child at kindergarten and just hand the first one to each mother and say, you can go home with whoever we get you to. Like, the mothers and the children will object. Like, yes, there's a lot in common, but they aren't one. And I'm very fond of several of the horned gods. And of course, they're going to have a lot in common. I think I understand the attitude, the goat connection a lot better now that I've kept goats. If you've ever had a male goat and had to deal with him for years, there is something about a horny goat that is just different. I've never kept a bull. I don't know what they're like, but I have known several horny goats, and that's different. So
it certainly is. You could ask Dennis and Linda about horny rams.
Yeah.
Well, we think that goats are domesticated, but you can't quite truly domesticate a goat.
Any more than you could domesticate a cat,
No.
for God's sake.
So which of the horned gods do you work with most often?
Oh, Pan and Kronos are my two favorite, and in our house we put Dionysus in that category too, because he sometimes appeared in the form of a bull. So that to me kind of puts him in that category. But the idea that all of these deities are essentially the same is an old one, and I really think I think the person to blame more than anyone else is probably Margaret Murray, who really wrote that in 1931 in her book, The God of the Witches. You know, there's an ancient cave painting in France, and every horned deity in the history of the world comes from that one particular image. And, you know, Pan is Kronos, is Hern, all this way through. And it's a lovely, lovely story, but the gaps in history are too big for it to be true. Pan has the horns of a goat and Kronos has the antlers of a stag. I mean, that's really different. The symbolism of those two things are really, really different. But for a long time, that was sort of holy writ in a lot of witch and pagan spaces. That story was repeated over and over in a lot of books. And, you know, it's a nice story. You know, I mean, if we're doing ritual, we might, you know, sort of use that version of myth to illustrate a point. But to me, Pan is Pan and Kronos is Kronos, and they're very separate.
And they are unique in their own way. And this really cuts to the core of a lot of my own spiritual thinking as someone who's had a Zen practice for 30 years. And that is, I firmly accept the existence of God. There is one God, but that God does not exist in our reality. The God exists in the void. But I have always believed for a long time that because we are all different, God manifests to each of us in whatever form is most helpful to us in that place at that time. And if that isn't a good explanation for why there are 27,399 gods, just accept that whether it's Pan or Kronos or any other god you want to name, that is what God is trying to be to you right then. So I accept them all. And, you know, when somebody's, you know, my wife is a follower of Thor. And she has this beautifully handcrafted Thor's hammer for which she wove 6-link Byzantine chainmail cord. And I accept that fully. You know, that's her God. He's with her. So, you know, it doesn't matter. And if at times you find that one God feels more right for your situation, that's just God being God.
There's a lot of debate in the pagan community today about polytheism versus soft polytheism versus sort of the idea that's in the Wiccan Rede, you know, listen to the words of the great goddess, she who of old was called, and then there's a bunch of different names. This idea that all these goddesses or horned gods are the same. You know, history will tell us that different deities have evolved from other deities, and we've seen deities smushed together, especially as Greeks and Egyptians came together. And I have a lot of friends who are very hard polytheists, and I look at something like Woden and Odin. Are those separate beings or the same being? You know, it kind of makes my head spin. I think the truth is what your experiences are, and, you know, how they resonate with you is always the most important thing. You know, Pan and Kronos really don't have anything in common in a lot of ways. However, people both look at them as aspects of this greater horned god. And who am I to say that that greater horned god does not exist? I have to assume that deity can do things that we cannot do, and, you know, operates at a different level than we do.
Oh, absolutely. The rules of God do not apply anywhere else. And that includes appearing whatever they need to be, whenever they need to be, to whoever they need to be, and then doing whatever they damn well please.
We are. I did want to ask you what in regards to ritual, music. do you incorporate music into your ritual? Not having read your ritual book yet. So
I do sometimes, you know, it depends on the circumstances and things. I think if you're doing something in the middle of the ritual, like an activity or whatever, that music can be really, really helpful, especially if people are going to whisper or something, right? Because it kind of preserves the mood a little bit. So often I have music in the background of whatever it is we're doing. I've done a lot of ecstatic rituals for Pan and Dionysus at festivals, you know, which are really mostly about dancing and shouting and yelling profanities. And often we'll have a drummer there, you know, and that's it. That's the music, is the drummer, but that's all that we need, is that one thing. You know, I have lots of thoughts about music and ritual, because I've seen people who, you know, do a ritual and they're relying on 9 drummers to be there and a Greek chorus, and then none of those people show up. And so their ritual suffers because of that. And this is a local high priestess in our area, and she's like, I never use recorded music. And I'm like, well, you know what? Your ritual probably would have been better if you'd used recorded music, because all of that music you wanted to do didn't happen because all of your people didn't show up. So I like music. I also really advocate, if you're in charge of a ritual, making sure that you control the circumstances of the ritual. And if you want to have 12 drummers and a Greek chorus, that's great, but have a backup plan in case they don't show up. Music affects us at a very emotional level. You can create a lot of emotions using a particular song. I know at Samhain, we have one ritual that we really like to do. And, you know, we kind of build these walls in our ritual space, and we put pictures of deceased loved ones there, and you kind of have to walk around and find them there. And so you can have that moment with them. And in the background, we play things like Sandy Denny's Who Knows Where the Time Goes, just because it just seems appropriate for the moment, and it adds to the emotion of the moment. And then there are the rituals in honor of Jim Morrison as the 20th century Dionysus. Those, of course, are all set to music, you know, because the Doors are a great soundtrack for ritual.
Jason, I have a question. We talk about ritual, and it's all been about pretty much public ritual.
Yeah.
But I think about private ritual, and I have a couple that I observe pretty strictly. And I say that in the sense that these are activities that I engage at pretty much the same time every day, doing the same things for the same specific purposes. And my Zen sitting is one of those rituals that, you know, it's like when you get to where you do it and it's like breathing, then you've got it. But as goofy as it may sound, when I lie down at night, I want to be able to let go of the burdens of the day. And believe it or not, one of the things I do is I have a sleeve of saltine crackers on my bedside table. And I will sit and think about the day, and I'll eat 3 or 4 of those. Like, I don't want to say they're like communion wafers, but it's this very bland, neutral bread thing.
Yes.
And that's when I think, and I thank Mother Hulda for her help, and hope that my offerings were sufficient, and ask if there are any friendly spirits in the area that can help me with my problems. But the idea is there is this incredible end of day focus. And to me, that's pure ritual as defined.
Absolutely.
And it can be as rickety and ramshackle as saltine crackers and a glass of water. But I wanted to kick that out there because I haven't been a big participant in any kind of public ritual since I was active in the Lutheran Church, but which was a long time ago. But it seemed important.
Rituals are more than just, you know, as a group setting, you know, and they're more than just moments of doing magic or doing some sort of devotional or seasonal activity. You know, rituals are the little moments that define our life. I mean, every day before my wife goes to work, she kisses me. And it's a little gesture, but it starts my day every day. I can't imagine being home and not having that kiss. If I'm really hungover, maybe I don't want it that morning and I want to sleep more, but it still happens. It's a part of the ritual. It's part of every day
Well,
and what we do.
geez, you made me remember one of the most important rituals in my life. That if I'm going out anywhere, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm going to whatever. And at night, when I say goodnight to my wife, close her door, love you. And it feels wrong if we don't say that.
Absolutely. We say it every night. And, you know, those are the little things that define us. I know, like when I start my writing day, you know, there's a little devotional ritual I do at the altar behind me every day. That's how I start. And, you know, it's a tiny little thing, but it sets the mood for and the energy for what the rest of the day will be.
Mm.
Have you heard Isaac Bonwitz's ritual to the great goddess Caffeina?
I have.
Yeah,
I'm lucky enough to
I
go
haven't.
to many festivals.
I'll give you a copy of the tape somewhere. You take your ritual vessel, which everyone has their own, and you greet the rising sun to the west, because of course you don't want that bright light in your eyes until you've had your libation to the goddess. And
I will do that with the coffee cup that has a full structural model of a caffeine molecule printed on the side.
But he was using it to indicate that ritual is anything that you do in a certain order that creates a change of consciousness. And that first cup of coffee in the morning creates a change of consciousness.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that we have to have rituals to some of us to go to sleep at night. And they're probably rituals. When I was younger, there was a thing, and you would see it in movies a lot. If you had two people in bed and they were smoking, you knew they had sex.
Yes.
So obviously that cigarette was a ritual part of the sexual act. So.
Yeah, I've seen that referenced as da-da-da-da, and then they smoked cigarettes. But yeah, my evening ritual is a lot about going to sleep because I'm letting go of the day. But the goddess Caffeine, I got to remember that, because I've always been one to joke that scientists around the world are struggling to develop reliable artificial intelligence. I brew a pot of it every morning.
But anyway, so yeah, we're getting close to the end, and you have to be able to get off to your trivia contest or whatever.
You know, we live in a weird society where people don't hang out in person very much anymore. You know, like remember my parents used to go to bowling leagues. So the trivia is a way to hang out with people in public spaces. And I really kind of value that, because, you know, so much of our lives are not about that so much anymore.
Is it in a public space with masks or?
So we said, like, I live in California, and we're lucky that if it's at a restaurant, it's at a bar, and we get a table on the back patio, so we're outside.
Outside is good.
Socially distanced to a degree, but you know, there are people also inside sitting around with no masks on. Trivia is not as crowded as it used to be. That's for sure.
Yeah, gaming and karaoke. That's true. So true, Starwolf.
I was wondering, I think that's one of the handicaps of modern pagan ritual is we don't have that wonderful, let's face it, the Baptists, as much as I disagree with some of their interpretations of expressing Christ's love, have wonderful music. I love gospel. I love a lot of the hymns and carols. When I was a young pagan, we had Gwydion Pentuaran. And we're lucky around here because we have the Earth Spirit choir Mother Tongue and the choir of the First Kingdom of Church of Asphodel, and I've heard Wendy Rule and Jenna Green and you know there's some beautiful pagan music out there, but I have not found anyone like Gwydion since he died. Do you have his music?
Of course, it's hard. It's really hard to get now, which makes me extremely sad
Oh, I
because
thought
all
it
of it,
was easy to get now because you can get it on Amazon.
I think you can get it on YouTube, but for a long time you couldn't download his music or anything. And all there were the kind of CDs which come from a record that somebody was lucky enough to find.
Yeah.
And that was it. I haven't looked to see if it's changed recently because I have it like stored in my computer, and you can also listen to it on YouTube, but it was out of print and it was like really inaccessible because of some of the copyright. I think if you like Gwydion, I think Dave the Bard's music is really good. I'm a big fan of Dave. He's really terrific.
He's not local to us. I suppose that there's other artists out on the West Coast.
Dave's in the UK, so he's
okay.
far away, but you can listen to him anywhere, which is nice. His music's pretty easily available, and he comes to the US every couple of years. Some festival will bring him in. But, you know, where we are, we have Sharon Knight, who's local, and that's really about it. Just because it's so expensive to live out here, we've lost a lot of the artists.
You know, music is so beautiful and so fundamental, though, because Chippewa, you talk about gospel music. Gospel is not the highest on my list, but I can look at lots of religions and adore their music. And I know especially one of the things about being in the Lutheran Church back in the late 60s when I was there right out of high school was, at least our church, exercised the option that the entire liturgy could be sung if you wanted to. And some of the most beautiful music I sang there or in high school chorus was the beauty of the sacred music, whether it's Buxtehude or Bach or whatever. There is a power to this music that you cannot ignore.
Yeah, Bill, I want to give the last couple minutes to Jason.
Yeah, that sounds fair. I'm going to mute here because we are.
And just this is where I used to ask the guests, and where can we see you? If we're not going to go to your trivia night, are you getting any traveling in? I know that Changing Times decided, this month that we didn't quite dare to open up to have a public conference this year. Where
So
are you doing a round of virtual?
I don't think I'm doing anything virtually for quite a while, but there are some in-person things coming up, and I'm really excited about that. Nothing near you all, but I'll be at Paganicon in Minneapolis over Ostara weekend, over the spring equinox. And it looks like that's going to happen regardless of where we are with COVID, but those numbers are really going down right now. So I feel good about that. And I'll be outside of Nashville, Tennessee for the Pagan Unity Festival, which is the end of May, early June. That's an outdoor festival. And I'm going to go to Mystic South in Atlanta, which is in July. Because, of all the places to go in July, Atlanta sounds like a great one, where it'll be 110 degrees. But it looks like there's going to be some indoor things this year, and I'm excited about that. Being unable to see my people for 2 years was pretty rough.
Yeah, outside will help. I feel more confident about outside than inside.
I think so too, but I know 2 of those are indoors. Paganicon in Minneapolis in March is definitely an indoor, but they're asking for proof of vaccination. There's going to be mask requirements. They're trying to do everything possible to keep people safe. Hopefully numbers continue to go down and, everyone will have a good time, especially July in Atlanta. Hopefully numbers are really down and maybe we can have a festival like normal, like we used to in the before times.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting more comfortable in masks, and maybe we made our decision at the tail end of the January spike, but we don't know what my thing was. Okay, we're soothsayers. Let's do divination and find out whether it'll be safe. But it's like when we thought about all the things we had to do, we said, you know, we do all these things, we're kind of going to take the fun out of it. So,
as somebody pointed out earlier, though, I think the online festivals have been really good for allowing people to go to a wide variety of workshops and see a lot of different presenters and speakers, because you don't have to leave your house. You don't have to pay to travel. You don't have to rent a hotel room or buy a bunch of camping gear. So I hope a lot of those continue into the future, because I do think there's a lot of value there with those.
and that may allow some of the people that are older, like myself, when you get older, camping becomes more difficult. And
I'm nearly 50. I mean, I'm tired of it.
50.
So
Oh, kids these days.
I know.
but I'm just saying that
whippersnappers.
there are people who, especially if you're single, carrying all of the cots and things that it takes to keep an 70 person moving, you kind of need an apprentice to do the heavy lifting for you. But
I'm going to be
anyway.
perfectly, that, I couldn't have been at CTCW last time because if it wasn't virtual, I couldn't be there.
But
I
I
could
want
not
to
have-
thank you, and I'm going to turn off the recording now. And anybody
Okay.
wants to keep talking may. But thank you so much.